in Southeast Asia, I think terrorism is a pressing issue domestically in a couple of locations in the Philippines with Abu Sayyaf and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, in Indonesia and Malaysia with Jemaah Islamiyah, and then in Thailand with a southern Malay Islamist insurgency. Increasingly also there's a sort of cross-regional threat of radicalized fighters who have gone off to places like Syria or historically to places like Afghanistan, and when those wars finally conclude, they return home with a set of military tactics and training that they didn't previously have, plus the will to radicalize and spread that message. What you find in Southeast Asia, is perhaps you do in many parts of the world outside the Middle East, is that you have a radical Islamic message, but also you have very parochial sort of local interests that complement or merge with these sort of broader themes. So I mean, I think that you look at places like the southern Philippines or southern Thailand, both good examples where political separatism is a sort of key component of these groups. Now, I think there are a couple of other ways that Southeast Asia may differ. One is, in its geography, the fact that there are archipelagos in Indonesia and the Philippines in particular, provides a sort of very obvious, I think, geographical safe haven for a lot of these groups because there are so many islands that are just sort of beyond the reach of the state. I think in addition, and this may not actually separate it from the Middle East so much, but there are economic issues. There's dire poverty and people who sort of live beyond the welfare or safety net of the state. When those things combine, it can be a sort of a recipe for radicalization. So during this U.S. election cycle, there's been a lot of discussion about the extent to which immigration policy may be connected to global terrorism and terrorism in the U.S. And the suggestion has been kicked around, for instance, that a tighter border restrictions and restrictions on immigration of Muslims in particular into the U.S. Might actually be in the U.S. sort of national security interests. Interestingly, I think in Southeast Asia, it may be the opposite may be true. One of the sort of concerns that has been highlighted to me most is the fact that if there were sort of large or sweeping restrictions on immigration of Southeast Asians into the U.S., then we might actually see sort of domestic political blowback in places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. That in those countries already there's a perception that in the post 9/11 era in particular, it's been very difficult for people from Indonesia, for instance, to immigrate to the U.S. even if they're college educated or pursuing advanced degrees at U.S. schools. And I think that for that reason it's a very sort of sensitive subject, and if domestic policymakers in Indonesia were faced with a public that was more critical of the U.S., it might be difficult for them to preserve cooperation on security issues, which could ultimately undermine sort of stability and security in the region.